What if I told you that everything you think makes you happy is actually making you more miserable? Recent findings from Harvard's study of adult development, now spanning 85 years of research, reveal that most people are chasing the wrong kind of happiness, and it's destroying their mental health. This isn't just another self-help theory. We're talking about hard science that tracks real people from teenagers to old age, measuring what actually creates lasting fulfillment versus what just feels good in the moment. Today we're breaking down the latest psychology of happiness with Dr. Mayur Kardos, and this conversation will completely change how you think about joy, pleasure, and what it really means to live a fulfilling life. Because here's what most people don't realize about happiness: the pleasure trap that's destroying mental health. There's a massive neurochemical difference between what most people think makes them happy and what actually creates lasting well-being. When I ask people what makes them happy, they usually mention things like getting likes on social media, buying something new, having a drink after work, or achieving a goal they've been working toward. But here's the problem: these aren't actually happiness. They're pleasure, and understanding this distinction could save your mental health. Let me explain what happens in your brain when you get a dopamine hit from checking your phone versus when you experience genuine connection with another person. When you see those red notification badges or get a new follower, your brain releases dopamine. This creates a quick spike of excitement, but it's short-lived. Within minutes, you're back to baseline or even lower. Your brain starts craving the next hit almost immediately. Now contrast this with what happens when you have a meaningful conversation with a friend or spend quality time with family. Your brain releases completely different chemicals: serotonin, oxytocin, and even endorphins. These create a sustained sense of well-being that can last for hours or even days. The key difference is that dopamine hits leave you wanting more, while these other neurochemicals leave you feeling satisfied and content. Research tracking participants over extended periods shows something alarming. People who primarily sought pleasure through shopping, social media, gaming, or substance use showed significant decreases in baseline happiness levels over time. Their brains literally rewired themselves to need more and more stimulation to feel normal. I've seen this pattern countless times in my practice. Consider the research on hospital patients who had views of nature versus brick walls. Patients with garden views recovered faster, needed less pain medication, and reported better moods. This wasn't about achieving something or getting validation. It was about connection to something larger than themselves. Yet most people spend their days chasing digital rewards instead of these deeper forms of satisfaction. The hedonic treadmill is this phenomenon where people think the next purchase, the next achievement, or the next experience will finally make them happy. But what actually happens is that each time they get what they want, their baseline expectation increases. So they need something bigger, better, or more expensive to get the same feeling. It's like being addicted to a drug where you need higher and higher doses to get the same effect. This is what I call happiness hijacking. Companies spend billions of dollars studying neuroscience to design products that trigger these dopamine pathways. Social media algorithms are specifically programmed to create intermittent reinforcement schedules, the same psychological principle that makes gambling addictive. You never know when you'll get that next like, comment, or share, so your brain stays in a constant state of anticipation. The shopping industry uses similar tactics. They create artificial scarcity with limited time offers and flash sales. They use bright colors, urgent language, and social proof to trigger your brain's fear of missing out. Even the layout of stores is designed to maximize impulse purchases by placing high dopamine items at eye level and near checkout counters. Here's what's really disturbing. Despite having more access to pleasure-inducing activities than any generation in history, anxiety rates have increased by 47% since 2020, and depression rates are up 52%. Young adults aged 18 to 25 show the highest rates of both conditions, and this is the demographic that consumes the most digital entertainment and social media. Your brain's reward system becomes dysregulated when you prioritize instant gratification over meaningful experiences. Think of it like training a muscle. If you only do light exercises, your muscles become weak and can't handle heavier loads. Similarly, if you only give your brain quick dopamine hits, it loses the ability to appreciate slower, deeper forms of satisfaction. I had a client, a marketing manager, who realized she was spending 4 hours daily scrolling through Instagram and online shopping. She felt constantly restless and couldn't focus on conversations with her husband or children. When we tracked her mood throughout the day, She noticed that she felt worse right after these pleasure-seeking activities, not better. The difference between feeling good temporarily and experiencing lasting well-being comes down to what neuroscientists call the brain's prediction error system. When you expect something good to happen, and it does, you get a small reward. But when something unexpectedly good happens, especially something that involves connection or meaning, your brain releases a much larger cascade of positive neurochemicals. This is why spontaneous acts of kindness feel so good, or why unexpected quality time with loved ones creates such lasting memories. Your brain isn't prepared for these experiences, so it responds more strongly. Meanwhile, planned pleasures like scheduled shopping trips or anticipated social media sessions create smaller and smaller responses over time because your brain learns to expect them. The framework for understanding genuine happiness neurologically involves three key systems. First, the connection system, which involves oxytocin and vasopressin and activates when we bond with others. Second, the meaning system, which involves serotonin and activates when we contribute to something larger than ourselves. Third, the growth system, which involves BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and activates when we learn new skills or overcome challenges. Real happiness isn't a feeling you chase. It's a state you create through specific behaviors and mindset shifts. People who understand this distinction and focus on connection, meaning, and growth instead of pleasure, achievement, and external validation report significantly higher life satisfaction scores and show measurably different brain patterns on neuroimaging studies. The most successful interventions I've seen involve helping people recognize when they're seeking pleasure versus when they're building genuine happiness. It's not about eliminating all pleasurable activities, but about understanding their role and not depending on them for your emotional well-being. When you can distinguish between these two types of experiences, you can start making choices that actually improve your mental health instead of undermining it. But this raises a crucial question. If pleasure isn't the answer, what does decades of scientific research actually tell us about lasting happiness? Harvard's 85-year study reveals the happiness secret. The Harvard study of adult development provides the definitive answer. This research has been tracking the same group of people for over 85 years now, making it the gold standard for understanding what creates lasting happiness. What makes this study extraordinary is that researchers have literally followed these participants from teenagers all the way to their 80s and 90s, measuring everything you can imagine about their lives. They started with 724 participants in 1938. Some were Harvard undergraduates, others were working-class boys from Boston neighborhoods. The researchers tracked their careers, relationships, health, finances, family lives, hobbies, everything. They conducted interviews every 2 years, collected medical records, took blood samples, did brain scans, and even interviewed their spouses and children. This level of detail over such a long period is unprecedented in psychological research. The current director, Robert Waldinger, has released findings that contain shocking revelations challenging everything our culture teaches about success and happiness. When researchers analyzed all the data to see what predicted life satisfaction at age 80, the results were stunning. Wealth had almost no correlation with happiness. Fame and professional achievements showed minimal impact on life satisfaction. Even physical health, while important, wasn't the strongest predictor. The Harvard findings show clear patterns when comparing participants who achieved conventional success versus those who lived modest lives, but scored highest on happiness metrics. Participants who accumulated significant wealth, achieved professional recognition, or gained public prominence often struggled with mental health issues, relationship problems, and a persistent sense that something was missing from their lives. The study documented that external achievements provided temporary satisfaction, but failed to create lasting happiness. In contrast, participants who maintained strong relationships throughout their lives consistently reported higher happiness levels. One participant worked as a public school teacher his entire career, never earned more than a middle-class income, and lived modestly. But he maintained close friendships from childhood, had a stable marriage volunteered in his community, and spent time with his grandchildren every week. His happiness scores were consistently among the highest in the entire study. This led researchers to identify what they call social fitness. Just like physical fitness requires regular exercise and attention, social fitness requires consistent investment in relationships. The study shows that social fitness is more important than physical fitness or financial fitness for predicting happiness and longevity. The neurological findings are particularly fascinating. When researchers used brain imaging technology to scan participants who had strong social connections versus those who were isolated, they found completely different activation patterns. People with quality relationships showed increased activity in areas associated with reward processing, emotional regulation, and stress recovery. Their brains literally looked different. The connected participants had higher levels of oxytocin and vasopressin, hormones that promote bonding and trust. They also showed lower levels of cortisol, the stress hormone that damages the immune system when chronically elevated. Most remarkably, their brains showed signs of neuroplasticity well into old age, meaning they continued growing new neural connections longer than isolated participants. The study's findings on loneliness are particularly alarming. Researchers discovered that chronic loneliness has significant health impacts comparable to other major risk factors. Lonely participants showed increased inflammation markers, compromised immune function, and higher rates of cardiovascular disease. The health impact of loneliness was substantial across all age groups. But here's the most important finding from the entire study. When researchers analyzed all the data to identify the single strongest predictor of happiness at age 80, they found it wasn't health, wealth, career success, or even current relationships. The strongest predictor of happiness at age 80 was relationship satisfaction at age 50. This means that the investments you make in your relationships during middle age determine your happiness 3 decades later. Participants who prioritized their marriages, maintained friendships, and stayed connected to family members during their 40s and 50s were significantly happier in their 80s, regardless of their health or financial situation. The study also revealed that happiness levels follow a predictable pattern throughout life. Participants typically reported highest happiness in their 20s, experienced a dip during middle age, then saw happiness levels rise again after age 60. This U-shaped curve appears across different cultures and economic backgrounds, suggesting it's a fundamental aspect of human development. What's particularly interesting is that participants who understood this pattern and actively worked to maintain relationships during the middle age dip were more likely to experience the upturn in later life. Those who became isolated during difficult periods often remained lonely and unhappy, even as their external circumstances improved. Recent updates include brain imaging data that shows how social connections literally change brain structure over time. Participants with strong relationships developed larger prefrontal cortexes, the brain region responsible for emotional regulation and decision-making. They also maintained more robust neural networks between different brain regions, which is associated with better cognitive function and emotional resilience. The study distinguishes between hedonic happiness, which comes from pleasure and positive emotions, and eudaimonic happiness, which comes from meaning and purpose. While both types contribute to well-being, the research shows that eudaimonic happiness derived from relationships and contribution to others provides more lasting satisfaction and better health outcomes. The researchers concluded that feeling connected to others reduces the risk of dying at any age and dramatically improves the chances of living healthily. The participants who invested in relationships didn't just live longer, they lived better, with more energy, better mental health, and greater life satisfaction well into their final years. This research fundamentally challenges our cultural assumptions about what creates a good life and provides a roadmap for building genuine happiness based on decades of real-world evidence. Yet despite having access to this knowledge, we're facing unprecedented levels of loneliness and mental health challenges in modern society. The digital age happiness crisis. The root of this crisis lies in how technology has fundamentally altered our relationship with connection itself. We live in the most connected era in human history. People have hundreds of friends on social media, instant messaging, video calls. Yet recent surveys show Gen Z prioritizes mental health more than any previous generation, with rising anxiety levels becoming a defining characteristic of young adults today. This is exactly the paradox that's defining mental health in our current era. Recent research shows concerning trends. The average person now spends significantly more time looking at screens than just a few years ago, and this increased digital consumption correlates with higher rates of depression and anxiety symptoms across age groups. We're experiencing what I call the connection illusion. People think they're socializing when they comment on posts, send emoji reactions, or participate in group chats. But neurologically, these digital interactions create completely different brain responses than face-to-face conversations. When you have an in-person conversation, your brain releases oxytocin, vasopressin, and endorphins. These chemicals create lasting feelings of bonding and contentment. Digital interactions primarily trigger dopamine, that quick hit we discussed earlier that leaves you wanting more. Recent brain imaging studies compared what happens when people interact digitally versus in person. Participants who spent an hour video chatting showed minimal activation in their brain's reward centers. But the same people having coffee together for an hour showed significant increases in areas associated with empathy, emotional regulation, and social bonding. The difference was dramatic. Social media platforms have created artificial social hierarchies that trigger our most primitive survival mechanisms. Your brain evolved over thousands of years to live in small groups where your social status directly affected your chances of survival. When early humans were rejected by their tribe, it often meant death. So your brain developed powerful systems to monitor social acceptance and status. Now these ancient systems are being activated by Instagram likes, follow accounts, and viral videos. Your brain interprets low engagement as social rejection, triggering the same stress responses our ancestors felt when facing actual threats. Research shows that users check their phones hundreds of times daily, and each check creates a small stress response as they evaluate their social standing. I worked with a 26-year-old influencer who had 50,000 followers, but felt completely isolated. She spent 6 hours daily creating content, responding to comments, and monitoring her metrics. But she hadn't had a meaningful face-to-face conversation in weeks. Her cortisol levels were chronically elevated, and she experienced panic attacks whenever her posts received less engagement than expected. Her brain was treating every low-performing post as a social crisis. This connects to what researchers call continuous partial attention. Most people can no longer focus completely on any single interaction because they're mentally tracking multiple digital conversations, notifications, and feeds simultaneously. Studies show that most people check their phones during face-to-face conversations, and this behavior prevents the deep neural synchronization that creates genuine connection. When you're physically present but mentally distracted, the other person's brain picks up on this unconsciously. Mirror neurons, which help us empathize and connect, become less active when they sense divided attention. This creates shallow relationships where people feel heard, but not truly understood. Over time, this pattern erodes the trust and intimacy necessary for happiness-boosting connections. The compare and despair culture has reached epidemic proportions. People curate their online presence to show only their best moments, vacations, achievements, happy relationships. But when you scroll through these highlight reels daily, your brain starts believing that everyone else lives a perfect life while you struggle with ordinary problems. Research shows that the vast majority of social media users report feeling inadequate after spending time on platforms, even when they intellectually understand that posts don't represent complete reality. One of my clients, a 32-year-old teacher, described her social media experience as watching a movie where everyone else was the star and she was just an extra. She spent her lunch breaks scrolling through friends' vacation photos while eating a sandwich at her desk. This daily comparison ritual made her feel like her life was boring and unsuccessful, even though she was actually content with her career and relationships when she wasn't comparing them to others. The attention economy profits from keeping people in states of dissatisfaction because dissatisfied people engage more with content and advertisements. Platform algorithms specifically promote content that triggers strong emotional responses, anger, envy, fear, or outrage, because these emotions drive clicks, shares, and comments. Research reveals that platforms earn significantly more revenue from users who report feeling anxious or inadequate compared to users who report feeling content. This creates a vicious cycle where people seek connection on platforms designed to make them feel disconnected. The more isolated they feel, the more they scroll, and the more isolated they become. Breaking this cycle requires understanding that digital platforms are businesses, not social services, and their primary goal is capturing your attention, not improving your well-being. But there are practical strategies that research shows can restore natural happiness mechanisms. Studies of participants who implemented specific changes to their technology use found significant improvements. Those who designated phone-free zones in their homes, turned off non-essential notifications, and replaced 1 hour of screen time daily with in-person activities showed substantial improvement in mood scores within 6 weeks. The most effective intervention was what researchers call relational investment time. Participants spent 30 minutes daily in focused, phone-free interaction with another person, having coffee with a colleague, playing with their children, or calling a family member. This simple practice activated the same neural pathways that long-term happiness research identifies as crucial for well-being. Another successful strategy involves conscious consumption of digital content. Instead of mindlessly scrolling, participants learned to actively choose what they consumed online. They unfollowed accounts that triggered comparison, limited news consumption to brief periods daily, and replaced passive scrolling with active creation, writing messages to friends, sharing encouraging comments, or creating content that reflected their authentic experiences rather than trying to impress others. The research also shows that understanding the neuroscience behind digital addiction helps people make better choices. When you recognize that the urge to check your phone is your brain seeking a dopamine hit, you can redirect that energy toward activities that provide deeper satisfaction. Taking a walk, calling a friend, or engaging in a hobby activates reward pathways without creating the crash that follows digital dopamine hits. The goal isn't to eliminate technology, but to use it in ways that support rather than undermine genuine human connection and happiness. But to truly understand why connection matters so much for our well-being, we need to look at what's actually happening inside our brains when we interact with other people. The neuroscience of human connection. When you have a meaningful conversation with someone, your brain treats this interaction as essential for survival. Neuroscientists using brain imaging technology observe activation in the same reward pathways that respond when you're eating while hungry or drinking when thirsty. Your brain literally processes human connection as a basic survival need, just like food, water, and shelter. The key player in this process is oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone. Studies show immediate oxytocin release during positive social contact. When you hug someone, make eye contact, or engage in synchronized activities like dancing or singing together. But oxytocin doesn't work alone. It triggers a cascade of other neurochemicals, including vasopressin, which promotes loyalty and attachment, and endorphins, which create feelings of pleasure and pain relief. This neurochemical cascade creates lasting effects that extend well beyond the initial interaction. Research shows that elevated oxytocin levels can persist for hours after positive social contact ends, which explains why a good conversation or warm hug can improve your mood for the rest of the day. This sustained neurochemical response demonstrates why quality social interactions have such powerful effects on mental health and overall well-being. Physical touch activates multiple neural pathways simultaneously, making it particularly powerful for creating connection. When someone touches you in a caring way, pressure receptors under your skin send signals to your vagus nerve, which connects directly to your brain's emotional centers. This activates the parasympathetic nervous system, reducing stress hormones and promoting feelings of safety and calm throughout your entire body. Eye contact creates an even more complex neurochemical response that goes beyond simple oxytocin release. When you look into someone's eyes during conversation, your brain activates specialized networks that help you understand and respond to their emotional state. This visual connection triggers the release of multiple bonding chemicals, while simultaneously helping your brain process social cues and emotional information. The consequences of lacking meaningful connection are severe and measurable. Isolated individuals show chronic activation of their threat detection systems. The amygdala, your brain's alarm center, becomes hyperactive when you're socially isolated. This triggers increased production of inflammatory proteins and stress hormones that damage your immune system over time, creating a cascade of negative health effects. Recent longitudinal studies tracking adults over multiple years found that socially isolated participants had significantly higher levels of inflammatory markers in their blood. These same inflammatory processes are associated with heart disease, diabetes, and accelerated aging. Social isolation literally ages your body faster than normal because your brain interprets the lack of connection as a survival threat, keeping your stress systems chronically activated. Your brain has evolved over millions of years to function within social groups. When early humans were separated from their tribe, it often meant death from predators, starvation, or exposure. So your brain developed powerful systems to monitor social connection and trigger alarm responses when that connection is threatened. These ancient survival mechanisms remain active today, which is why social rejection creates genuine physical and emotional pain. The anterior cingulate cortex, the brain region that processes physical pain, becomes highly active during social rejection. Brain imaging studies of people who recently experienced breakups or social exclusion show the same neural activation patterns as people experiencing physical injury. This is why we use phrases like broken heart or hurt feelings. Social pain and physical pain are processed by identical brain systems. Different types of relationships activate distinct neural networks in your brain, each serving specific psychological and biological functions. Romantic relationships trigger intense activity in the ventral tegmental area, which is associated with reward, motivation, and attachment. This is why new romantic relationships can feel intoxicating. Your brain floods with dopamine and norepinephrine, creating powerful bonding experiences. Family relationships activate different networks, particularly areas associated with caregiving and long-term attachment. When parents interact with their children, both brains show increased activity in regions that produce oxytocin and vasopressin. These hormones create the powerful bonding that motivates parents to care for their children even during difficult or exhausting periods. Friendships activate networks associated with cooperation and social support. When you spend time with friends, your brain shows increased activity in areas that process social rewards and emotional regulation. This neurological response explains why good friendships help you manage stress and navigate life's challenges more effectively than trying to handle difficulties alone. Even introverts require meaningful social connection for optimal brain function and mental health. Recent research found that introverts need less social stimulation than extroverts, but they still require quality relationships to maintain neurochemical balance. Introverted participants who maintained 2 or 3 close relationships showed the same positive brain changes as extroverts with larger social networks. The key difference is that introverts prefer deeper, more intimate connections rather than broad social networks. Their brains show stronger activation in response to meaningful one-on-one conversations compared to group interactions. But they still need those connections to maintain the neurochemical balance necessary for happiness and well-being. What's particularly important is that these biological systems can't be fooled by superficial interactions. Your brain distinguishes between genuine connection and social performance. When people engage in conversations where they're not truly present or emotionally invested, the neurochemical responses are much weaker. This is why you can feel lonely even when surrounded by people if those interactions lack depth and authenticity. Research indicates that your brain needs approximately 150 minutes of meaningful social interaction per week to maintain optimal neurochemical balance. This doesn't mean small talk or casual encounters. It means conversations where you feel heard, understood, and emotionally connected to another person. When you consistently meet this threshold, your brain maintains healthy levels of oxytocin and serotonin while keeping stress hormones properly regulated. Understanding these neurological mechanisms helps explain why human connection is so fundamental to happiness. But it also raises an interesting question about other types of connection gardening revolution that might activate. Research reveals that our brains respond to nature in ways that mirror human connection, activating similar neurochemical pathways that promote lasting happiness. Gardening has emerged as a particularly effective intervention for improving mental health, with studies showing that exposure to plants and green spaces can reduce stress and anxiety levels while offering a natural remedy to the pressures of modern life. When people engage in gardening activities, their brains release serotonin from sunlight exposure, endorphins from physical activity, and oxytocin from caring for living things. This creates a neurochemical combination designed to boost well-being across multiple pathways simultaneously. The physical activity involved in gardening, such as digging and planting, contributes to increased muscle strength, improved flexibility, and enhanced cardiovascular health, providing moderate-intensity exercise that's gentle on the joints. The tactile experience of working with soil activates pressure receptors in your hands that send signals directly to your brain's emotional regulation centers. This stimulation triggers the release of GABA, a neurotransmitter that reduces anxiety and promotes calm. Research shows that people who garden regularly have measurably different stress responses compared to non-gardeners, with lower baseline anxiety levels and faster recovery from stressful events. Studies indicate that gardening can reduce cortisol levels and improve sleep quality within weeks of regular practice. Participants who spent time gardening showed decreased inflammation markers and better immune function compared to control groups. The combination of physical activity, sunlight exposure, and purposeful engagement with living systems creates measurable improvements in both psychological and physiological health markers. Caring for living things fulfills deep psychological needs that many people don't realize they have. Humans evolved as nurturing creatures who found purpose in helping other life forms thrive. When you water a plant, remove weeds, or harvest vegetables, you're activating the same neural pathways that our ancestors used when raising children or caring for community members. This triggers what researchers call biophilic satisfaction, a sense of meaning that comes from supporting life. I've seen this transformation repeatedly in my practice. One client, a 45-year-old accountant, started gardening after experiencing burnout from her corporate job. Initially, she felt silly talking to her tomato plants, but within weeks she noticed remarkable changes. Her chronic insomnia improved, her irritability decreased, and she felt more optimistic about her future. When we discussed what changed, she described feeling needed by her plants in a way that her spreadsheets never made her feel. The meditative aspects of gardening provide unique benefits for anxiety reduction. Unlike sitting meditation, gardening gives your mind something to focus on while your body engages in repetitive, rhythmic movements. Planting seeds, pulling weeds, and watering plants create what researchers call active meditation. Studies show that participants who gardened for 45 minutes achieved similar brainwave patterns as experienced meditators, but they reached these states more quickly and with less effort. Horticultural therapy programs in hospitals and mental health facilities are producing remarkable results. Programs tracking patients with depression, anxiety, and trauma-related disorders found that participants who engaged in gardening activities 3 times weekly showed significantly greater improvement in their symptoms compared to traditional therapy alone. The success of these programs has led to their expansion across multiple medical centers. One particularly moving case involved a veteran with PTSD who couldn't sleep through the night for 3 years after returning from deployment. Traditional therapies provided minimal relief, but after joining a gardening program, he began sleeping better within 2 weeks. He described feeling safe among the plants, explaining that gardens represent growth and life rather than destruction and death. His hypervigilance decreased as he learned to focus on nurturing rather than scanning for threats. Seasonal cycles and plant growth provide natural rhythm and hope that many people desperately need. In our climate-controlled, artificially lit world, many people lose connection with natural cycles. This disconnection can contribute to depression and anxiety because your brain needs environmental cues to regulate circadian rhythms and hormone production. Research shows that gardeners demonstrate more stable sleep patterns, better seasonal mood regulation, and higher optimism scores throughout the year. The act of planting seeds and watching them grow creates what psychologists call future-oriented thinking. When you plant a garden, you're making a commitment to the future and creating concrete reasons for hope. Studies found that gardeners scored significantly higher on measures of future optimism compared to non-gardeners. They had specific, tangible goals to look forward to and concrete evidence that their efforts would produce positive results. Community gardens and shared gardening spaces offer additional mental health benefits, with participants reporting higher levels of social cohesion, neighborhood satisfaction, and community engagement. Gardening programs in senior living facilities have shown improvements in quality of life, socialization, and cognitive functioning, with residents forming meaningful relationships through shared gardening activities. The cyclical nature of gardening, involving planting, tending, harvesting, and planning for the next season, creates opportunities for goal setting and achievement that build self-efficacy and self-esteem. This integration of mindfulness with purposeful activity enhances the mental health benefits of both practices, as the seasonal rhythms and daily changes in a garden draw attention to the present moment. Even apartment dwellers can access these benefits through indoor gardening, herb containers, or weekend visits to community gardens. The key is regular interaction with living plants, rather than passive exposure to nature through windows or photos. Your brain needs active engagement with living systems to trigger the neurochemical responses that improve mood and reduce stress. Research shows that just 20 minutes of plant care 3 times weekly can produce measurable improvements in mental health within 4 weeks. This makes gardening one of the most accessible and effective interventions for improving happiness and reducing anxiety that researchers have identified. But while nature connection provides powerful benefits, there's another practice that consistently appears in happiness research as equally transformative for mental well-being: the gratitude practice that rewires your brain. Gratitude represents one of the most scientifically validated approaches to improving mental health and rewiring the brain for lasting happiness. Recent research has completely transformed how we understand brain plasticity and the power of appreciation practices. Studies tracking participants using advanced brain imaging technology reveal that consistent gratitude practice literally grows new neural pathways in your brain. This isn't metaphorical. Researchers can observe these structural changes on brain scans within weeks of starting a gratitude practice. When you regularly focus on things you appreciate, your brain creates stronger connections between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. The prefrontal cortex handles rational thinking and emotional regulation, while the limbic system processes emotions and memories. Gratitude practice builds neural pathways between these regions, making it easier for your rational mind to influence your emotional responses and maintain emotional balance during challenging situations. The three-group study methodology has produced remarkable findings that surprised even veteran researchers. Scientists divided participants into three groups. The first group wrote about things they were grateful for each day. The second group wrote about daily frustrations and complaints. The third group simply recorded neutral events without emotional commentary. After 10 weeks, brain scans revealed dramatic differences between the groups. The gratitude group showed increased activity in the hypothalamus, the brain region that regulates stress, sleep, and metabolism. Their dopamine production increased during the gratitude exercises, creating natural feelings of reward and motivation. Most remarkably, these changes persisted even when participants weren't actively practicing gratitude. Their brains had literally rewired themselves to notice and appreciate positive experiences more readily. The complaint group showed the opposite pattern. Their amygdala, the brain's alarm center, became hyperactive. Stress hormone production increased, and they showed decreased activity in areas associated with empathy and social connection. Their brains had trained themselves to focus on problems and threats, creating a cycle of negative thinking that became self-reinforcing. Writing about gratitude for just 10 weeks created lasting changes in brain activation patterns that researchers could measure 6 months later. Participants who completed the gratitude intervention showed sustained increases in prefrontal cortex activity and continued decreases in amygdala reactivity. Their brains had developed new default patterns that favored positive interpretation of events and better emotional regulation. This research reveals a crucial distinction between forced positivity and authentic appreciation. Forced positivity involves pretending everything is fine when it's not, or trying to eliminate negative emotions entirely. This approach actually increases stress because it requires constant effort to maintain an artificial emotional state. Your brain recognizes the disconnect between your genuine feelings and your forced expressions, creating internal conflict. Authentic appreciation works differently. It involves genuinely recognizing and valuing positive aspects of your experience without denying difficulties or challenges. When you authentically appreciate something, your brain releases oxytocin and serotonin naturally. These neurochemicals create genuine feelings of contentment and connection that don't require ongoing effort to maintain. Brain imaging data shows increased activity in the prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate during genuine gratitude practice. The anterior cingulate is particularly important because it bridges emotional and rational processing. When this region is active, you can acknowledge difficulties while still recognizing positive elements in your situation. This balanced perspective promotes resilience and emotional stability. Participants who practiced authentic gratitude showed better emotional regulation during stressful situations compared to control groups. When faced with challenges, their brains automatically activated appreciation circuits alongside problem-solving networks. This allowed them to maintain hope and motivation even during difficult circumstances. Gratitude practice reduces activity in the brain's threat detection centers, particularly the amygdala and anterior insula. These regions constantly scan your environment for potential dangers or problems. When chronically activated, they create persistent anxiety and hypervigilance. Regular gratitude practice calms these systems by redirecting attention toward positive and neutral stimuli rather than threats. Research has identified specific techniques most effective for rewiring negative thought patterns. The 3 Good Things exercise involves writing down 3 positive events from each day and explaining why each was meaningful. This practice increased positive emotion scores and decreased depression symptoms within 6 weeks of consistent practice. Gratitude letters proved even more powerful. Participants who wrote detailed letters expressing appreciation to important people in their lives showed significant improvement in happiness measures. Even when they didn't send the letters, the act of articulating specific reasons for gratitude created lasting neural changes. Their brains developed stronger pathways for recognizing and valuing positive relationships. The gratitude visit technique produced the most dramatic results. Participants arranged meetings with people who had positively impacted their lives and read their gratitude letters aloud. This exercise created substantial improvement in happiness scores that lasted for 3 months. The combination of writing, speaking, and witnessing the recipient's response activated multiple brain networks simultaneously. The compound effect of gratitude extends far beyond mood improvement. Sleep quality improved among regular gratitude practitioners. Their brains showed increased production of melatonin and decreased cortisol levels at bedtime. The practice of reflecting on positive experiences before sleep helped their nervous systems transition into rest mode more effectively. Immune function strengthened significantly in gratitude practitioners. Blood tests revealed higher levels of immunoglobulin A, an antibody that protects against illness. Inflammation markers decreased, reducing the risk of chronic diseases associated with stress and negative emotions. Gratitude practice literally strengthens your body's ability to fight off illness and maintain health. Relationship satisfaction increased among couples who practiced gratitude together. When partners regularly expressed appreciation for each other, their brains released more oxytocin during interactions. This bonding hormone strengthened their emotional connection and improved their ability to resolve conflicts constructively. Gratitude practice helped them notice and value positive behaviors that they previously took for granted. Perhaps most remarkably, gratitude works even when people don't initially believe in its effectiveness. Studies recruiting participants who rated gratitude practices as unlikely to help found that despite their doubts, those who completed the gratitude intervention showed the same brain changes and happiness improvements as believers. The neurochemical responses to gratitude appreciation occur regardless of conscious expectations. This happens because gratitude activates evolutionary systems that developed long before human consciousness. When you focus on positive aspects of your experience, ancient brain circuits interpret this as evidence that you're safe and your needs are being met. These circuits automatically trigger neurochemical cascades that promote well-being and social bonding. The research shows that gratitude practice works by changing your brain's default attention patterns. Instead of automatically scanning for problems or threats, your brain learns to notice and appreciate positive elements in your environment. This shift creates an upward spiral where improved mood leads to better relationships and experiences, which provide more reasons for gratitude. Even 5 minutes of daily gratitude practice can begin rewiring your brain within 2 weeks. The key is consistency rather than duration. Your brain responds to repeated patterns, so brief daily practice is more effective than occasional longer sessions. But while these individual practices are powerful, the effectiveness of different approaches varies significantly across different populations and life circumstances. Demographics of happiness. Who's thriving in 2025? Recent research reveals fascinating patterns about who's actually thriving in our current world. When researchers analyzed happiness levels across different demographics, they discovered some unexpected findings that challenge many assumptions about who should be happiest. The data shows clear patterns across age groups that follow what researchers call the happiness U-curve. Young adults start with relatively high happiness levels, but satisfaction drops steadily through their 30s and 40s before rising again after age 55. People in their 40s face what psychologists call the perfect storm of stress: career pressures, financial responsibilities, aging parents, teenage children, and their own health concerns all converge simultaneously. But here's what surprised researchers most. Certain communities maintain extraordinarily high happiness levels despite facing significant economic challenges. Rural communities in Costa Rica, Denmark, and Bhutan consistently rank among the happiest populations globally, even though their average incomes are well below global medians. These communities share specific characteristics that override financial limitations. Costa Rican villages studied in the research showed remarkably high happiness scores despite modest annual incomes. Residents spend significant time in multi-generational family gatherings, participate in community festivals throughout the year, and maintain strong connections to nature through gardening and outdoor activities. Their cultural concept of pura vida emphasizes enjoying simple pleasures and maintaining optimistic perspectives during difficulties. Danish communities demonstrate similar patterns through their concept of hygge, creating cozy, comfortable experiences with loved ones. Even in small towns with limited economic opportunities, Danish residents prioritize work-life balance, community involvement, and quality time with family and friends. Research found that most Danish respondents said they would choose more time with loved ones over higher income if forced to decide. Cultural values significantly shape happiness outcomes across different societies. Individualistic cultures like the United States and United Kingdom show more variation in happiness levels, with higher peaks but also deeper valleys. Collectivistic cultures in East Asia, Latin America, and parts of Africa show more consistent happiness levels across their populations. Societies emphasizing family connections and community support show substantially less variation in individual happiness scores. Japanese communities illustrate this pattern through their concept of ikigai, finding purpose through contribution to others. Despite economic pressures and aging populations, Japanese regions with strong community structures maintain happiness levels comparable to much wealthier Western nations. Residents who participate in neighborhood associations, volunteer activities, and multi-generational housing arrangements report significantly higher life satisfaction than those living independently. Gender differences in happiness have shifted dramatically since previous studies. Recent data shows that women aged 25 to 45 report notably lower happiness levels than men in the same age group, reversing historical patterns. Researchers attribute this change to women facing increased pressure to excel in careers while maintaining primary responsibility for childcare and household management. Women in this demographic also show higher rates of anxiety and depression, particularly in countries with limited parental leave policies. However, women over 55 show higher happiness levels than men, suggesting that life satisfaction patterns differ significantly across life stages. Older women report stronger social connections, greater life purpose through caregiving roles, and better emotional regulation skills developed through earlier challenges. Education levels show complex relationships with happiness that vary by age and cultural context. Recent findings reveal that college graduates aged 25 to 35 report lower happiness levels than their peers without degrees, primarily due to student debt, career pressures, and delayed life milestones like homeownership and family formation. However, by age 45, college graduates show higher happiness levels, suggesting that education benefits emerge over time. Family structure significantly influences well-being patterns. Single-parent households show the most stress and lowest happiness scores across all demographics, with single mothers particularly affected. However, multi-generational households, grandparents, parents, and children living together, show surprisingly high happiness levels despite financial challenges. Research found that shared caregiving responsibilities and built-in social support systems override the stresses typically associated with crowded living conditions. Political climate and social unrest have measurable impacts on collective happiness levels. Populations living through political transitions show significantly higher rates of anxiety disorders and lower life satisfaction scores. Climate change concerns particularly affect younger demographics, with 18 to 30-year-olds showing persistent worry about environmental futures that impacts their overall well-being. Different generations define and pursue happiness through distinctly different approaches. Baby boomers prioritize financial security and family relationships, showing highest satisfaction when these basic needs are met. Generation X focuses on work-life balance and personal achievement, but struggles with competing demands from aging parents and adolescent children. Millennials emphasize experiences over possessions and show higher happiness when pursuing travel, learning, and social causes, but struggle with economic instability and social media comparison. Generation Z demonstrates unique patterns in happiness pursuit. They show heightened awareness of mental health issues and actively seek therapy, meditation, and wellness practices. However, they also report higher baseline anxiety levels and more difficulty with in-person social connections. Data shows Gen Z participants who limit social media use and prioritize face-to-face relationships achieve happiness levels comparable to older generations. Economic factors show diminishing returns on happiness beyond basic needs fulfillment. Research confirms that income increases happiness up to approximately $75,000 annually in developed countries, with minimal additional benefits beyond this threshold. However, income stability matters more than absolute amounts. People with predictable incomes report higher happiness than those earning more but facing income volatility. Across all demographic groups, certain lifestyle factors consistently predict higher happiness levels. Regular physical exercise correlates with improved mood regardless of age, gender, or cultural background. Quality sleep patterns, defined as 7 to 9 hours nightly with consistent bedtimes, show strong associations with life satisfaction. Meaningful work or volunteer activities that align with personal values contribute significantly to happiness across all demographics. Social connection remains the strongest predictor of happiness across every demographic category studied. Whether through family relationships, friendships, romantic partnerships, or community involvement, people with strong social ties consistently report higher life satisfaction. Socially connected individuals live longer, recover faster from illness, and maintain better mental health throughout their lives, regardless of their age, income, education, or cultural background. Understanding these demographic patterns reveals that happiness isn't just about external circumstances or what happens to us. There's another crucial factor that determines our well-being, something that operates entirely within our control. The self-family shapes our experience. The conversations we have inside our own heads represent one of the most powerful yet overlooked factors in determining our happiness levels. Recent research reveals that your internal dialogue doesn't just reflect your mental state, it actively creates it. The voice in your head is literally rewiring your brain every single day through consistent patterns of thought that reshape neural connections and influence emotional responses. When researchers monitored participants' brain activity during different types of internal dialogue, they found distinct neural patterns. People who consistently engaged in supportive self-talk showed increased activity in the prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, regions associated with emotional regulation and problem-solving. Those with critical or catastrophic internal dialogue showed heightened amygdala activity and increased stress hormone production. The most powerful finding involves how changing your question patterns can rewire brain responses. Most people ask destructive questions when facing challenges. They think things like, "Why does this always happen to me?" Or, "What's wrong with me?" These questions activate threat detection systems and trigger feelings of helplessness. Research shows that people who learn to ask different questions literally change their brain's response to stress. Let me share a case study that demonstrates this perfectly. I worked with a 34-year-old engineer who experienced chronic anxiety after losing his job. His internal dialogue was brutal. He constantly asked himself, "Why am I such a failure?" And "How will I ever find another job?" Brain scans showed overactive amygdala and elevated cortisol levels. His nervous system was stuck in survival mode. We worked on changing his question patterns. Instead of asking why he was failing, he learned to ask, "What skills can I develop during this transition?" And "How can this experience help me find better opportunities?" Within 6 weeks, his brain scans showed remarkable changes. Amygdala activity decreased significantly, while prefrontal cortex activation increased substantially. His anxiety symptoms improved dramatically, and he approached job searching with renewed energy and confidence. This connects to a crucial distinction between demanding perfection and preferring positive outcomes. People who demand that life be perfect set themselves up for constant disappointment and stress. Their brains interpret any deviation from perfection as a threat, triggering fight-or-flight responses. Research shows that perfectionist thinking patterns correlate with significantly higher anxiety levels and lower life satisfaction scores. Flexible thinking works completely differently. When you prefer positive outcomes, but accept that setbacks are natural, your brain maintains emotional balance during challenges. You can feel disappointed without becoming devastated. This flexibility allows your nervous system to recover quickly from stress and maintain baseline happiness levels. The difference between victim mentality and empowerment mindset creates profound changes in neurochemical production. Victim thinking involves phrases like, "This always happens to me," "I can't control anything," and "life is unfair." This internal dialogue triggers chronic stress responses and depletes neurotransmitters associated with motivation and pleasure. Research found that people with victim mentalities show substantially lower dopamine production and higher cortisol levels. Empowerment mindset uses completely different language. Instead of focusing on what's happening to you, you focus on how you can respond. Phrases like, "I can handle this," "What opportunities does this create?" and "How can I grow from this experience?" activate reward pathways and increase production of dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. These neurochemicals create feelings of motivation, confidence, and resilience. Forgiveness practices create particularly powerful changes in both mental and physical health. Research tracking participants who learned specific forgiveness techniques showed significant reduction in inflammation markers, improvement in sleep quality, and decrease in symptoms of depression and anxiety. Forgiveness literally reduces the stress load on your immune system and nervous system. I had a client who carried anger toward her ex-husband for 15 years after their divorce. She replayed conversations in her head, imagining what she should have said differently. This internal rehearsal of grievances kept her stress hormones chronically elevated and prevented her from forming new relationships. When she learned to forgive, not for his benefit, but for her own health, her entire physiology changed. Her blood pressure normalized, her sleep improved, and she began dating again within months. Catastrophic thinking patterns can be interrupted and redirected using specific techniques that research validates. When your mind starts spiraling into worst-case scenarios, you can interrupt the pattern by asking, "What evidence do I have that this will actually happen?" And "What's the most likely realistic outcome?" This cognitive restructuring activates rational thinking centers and calms emotional alarm systems. The technique involves 3 steps. First, notice when catastrophic thoughts begin. Second, examine the evidence for and against your fears. Third, develop more balanced perspectives based on facts rather than emotions. Participants who practiced this technique showed substantial reduction in anxiety symptoms and improved ability to handle stress without becoming overwhelmed. Developing supportive internal dialogue requires treating yourself like you would treat a good friend facing the same situation. Most people speak to themselves more harshly than they would speak to anyone else. They call themselves names, focus on their failures, and predict negative outcomes. This self-criticism creates the same neurochemical responses as being verbally attacked by another person. Self-compassion involves speaking to yourself with kindness, understanding, and encouragement. When you make mistakes, instead of thinking, "I'm so stupid," you might think, "Everyone makes mistakes. What can I learn from this?" This simple shift activates different neural pathways and promotes resilience rather than self-defeat. Research reveals that self-compassion is far more effective than self-criticism for creating lasting change. Self-criticism triggers shame and defensive responses that actually interfere with learning and growth. Self-compassion creates psychological safety that allows you to acknowledge mistakes without feeling threatened, making it easier to develop new behaviors and habits. Participants who practiced self-compassion showed greater improvement in reaching personal goals compared to those who used self-criticism as motivation. Self-compassionate people were more likely to persist through challenges, recover quickly from setbacks, and maintain motivation over time. Their brains developed stronger connections between emotional and rational processing centers. The most effective approach involves combining these self-talk techniques with mindfulness practices. When you become aware of your internal dialogue without judgment, you can recognize negative patterns before they spiral out of control. Gratitude practices complement this work by training your brain to notice positive aspects of your experience rather than automatically focusing on problems. Regular practice of these techniques creates lasting neuroplastic changes that improve emotional regulation, stress resilience, and overall happiness. Your internal dialogue becomes your most powerful tool for creating the mental and emotional states that support genuine well-being. But mastering your inner voice raises an important question about how you direct that mental energy toward activities and goals that truly matter. Meaningful growth versus empty achievement. The real question becomes how you channel your mental energy toward pursuits that create genuine fulfillment rather than temporary satisfaction. People work incredibly hard to reach their goals, but many still feel empty when they get there. What's the difference between growth that actually makes you happy versus growth that leaves you feeling depleted? This is one of the most important distinctions in psychology today. Research from positive psychology pioneers like Ed Diener and Martin Seligman consistently shows that people pursuing what they call intrinsic goals, personal growth, meaningful relationships, contributing to society, report significantly higher life satisfaction compared to those chasing extrinsic goals like wealth, fame, and status recognition. Their studies reveal that meaning correlates with greater well-being than material gains across cultures and age groups. The neurological differences are striking. When you work toward purpose-driven goals, your brain releases sustained levels of serotonin and dopamine. These chemicals create feelings of satisfaction and motivation that can last for weeks or months. But when you chase status-driven goals, you get quick dopamine spikes followed by rapid crashes. Your brain treats external achievements like drugs. You need bigger and bigger successes to feel the same level of satisfaction. I had a client who perfectly illustrates this difference. She was a marketing executive who earned 6 figures, drove a luxury car, and lived in an expensive apartment. By every external measure, she was successful. But she came to me because she felt completely empty inside. She described her achievements as checking boxes on someone else's list rather than building a life that reflected her values. During our work together, she discovered that her real passion was environmental conservation. She started volunteering with local conservation groups. On weekends, within weeks, she was sleeping better and felt more energetic. Eventually, she transitioned to working for a non-profit organization, taking a 40% pay cut. 2 years later, her happiness scores were dramatically higher than when she was earning twice as much money. This connects to what researchers call contribution happiness. Studies show that helping others activates reward centers in the brain more powerfully than receiving help or achieving personal goals. When you volunteer, mentor someone, or simply help a neighbor, your brain releases oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins simultaneously. This neurochemical cocktail creates what participants describe as a natural high that can last for days. Brain imaging studies show fascinating patterns in people who regularly contribute to others. Their prefrontal cortexes, responsible for decision-making and emotional regulation, show increased thickness and activity. Their amygdalas, the brain's alarm centers, become less reactive to stress. Most remarkably, they show increased activity in areas associated with reward processing even when they're not actively helping others. Their brains literally rewire themselves to find joy in giving. Skill development for its own sake creates completely different satisfaction patterns than skill development for external recognition. When you learn something because you genuinely enjoy the process, your brain releases BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which promotes neural growth and connectivity. This creates lasting changes in brain structure that enhance cognitive function and emotional well-being. Research tracking adults learning new skills reveals striking differences based on motivation. Half were motivated by external rewards like promotions or social recognition. The other half learned purely for personal satisfaction and growth. After extended periods, the intrinsically motivated group showed higher retention rates, better skill mastery, and significantly higher happiness scores related to their learning activities. Challenge and mastery play crucial roles in psychological well-being when approached correctly. Your brain needs appropriate levels of challenge to maintain optimal function. Too little challenge leads to boredom and stagnation. Too much challenge creates anxiety and overwhelm. But when you find activities that stretch your abilities without overwhelming your capacity, you enter what psychologists call flow states. Flow states activate unique neural networks that combine focused attention with relaxed awareness. During flow, your brain produces alpha waves associated with calm alertness, while simultaneously releasing dopamine and norepinephrine for motivation and focus. People who regularly experience flow report substantially higher life satisfaction and show improved resilience during stressful periods. I worked with a software engineer who felt burned out from his high-pressure job despite earning substantial income. He rediscovered his childhood love of woodworking and started spending weekends building furniture. The combination of physical work, creative problem-solving, and seeing tangible results from his efforts provided psychological benefits that his well-paid corporate job couldn't match. He eventually started a small woodworking business, finding more satisfaction in creating beautiful furniture than in writing code for applications he didn't care about. Creative expression and learning activate happiness pathways in ways that passive consumption cannot. Research shows that people who regularly engage in creative activities demonstrate lower rates of depression and higher life satisfaction scores. Creative expression activates the brain's default mode network, which is associated with self-reflection, meaning-making, and emotional processing. Learning new skills throughout life maintains cognitive flexibility and emotional resilience. Adult brains that regularly encounter novel information and challenges show increased neuroplasticity well into old age. Studies find that people who continued learning after formal education showed slower cognitive decline and maintained higher happiness levels throughout aging. Accepting constructive criticism is essential for meaningful development, but most people resist feedback because it threatens their self-image. Research shows that people who learn to separate their identity from their performance can use criticism as fuel for growth rather than evidence of inadequacy. They show increased activity in brain regions associated with learning and adaptation rather than threat detection. The distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic goals fundamentally affects long-term life satisfaction. Intrinsic goals align with your authentic values and interests. They provide satisfaction during the pursuit process, not just at completion. Extrinsic goals are imposed by external expectations or social pressures. They often feel hollow even when achieved because they don't reflect genuine personal values. People who focus on giving rather than getting report consistently higher happiness levels across all demographic categories. Research shows that individuals who regularly help others demonstrate lower rates of depression, better immune function, and higher life satisfaction scores. Giving activates evolutionary reward systems that developed to promote cooperation and community survival. The most successful approach involves identifying activities that combine personal growth with contribution to others. Teaching, mentoring, creating art that inspires people, or building businesses that solve meaningful problems provide both intrinsic satisfaction and external impact. These activities activate multiple happiness pathways simultaneously: mastery, purpose, connection, and contribution. Your brain needs meaningful challenges and growth opportunities to maintain optimal function. But the key is choosing growth that aligns with your authentic values rather than external expectations. When you pursue development that feels personally meaningful and contributes to something larger than yourself, you create sustainable satisfaction that doesn't depend on constant external validation or achievement. This raises fascinating questions about the full spectrum of connections that can provide this sense of meaning and fulfillment in our lives. The connection hierarchy, from humans to nature. Different types of relationships create distinct neural responses that together form what researchers call a connection ecosystem. Human beings have evolved to form bonds across multiple levels, and recent research shows that the most robust happiness comes from having diverse connections rather than relying on just one type of relationship. At the foundation, we have intimate human relationships, romantic partners, close family members, and best friends. These activate the deepest bonding circuits in your brain, releasing high levels of oxytocin and vasopressin. These relationships provide emotional security, physical affection, and deep understanding. They're the relationships where you can be completely authentic without fear of judgment. The next level includes broader social connections, colleagues, neighbors, acquaintances, and community members. These relationships activate different neural networks associated with social cooperation and belonging. They provide variety, intellectual stimulation, and a sense of being part of something larger than yourself. While less intimate than primary relationships, they're crucial for mental health because they prevent the isolation that can occur when you rely solely on one or two people for all your social needs. But here's where it gets interesting. Research reveals that connections with animals activate many of the same neurochemical pathways as human relationships. Studies show that pet owners report lower levels of loneliness and stress compared to those without pets, highlighting the therapeutic benefits of these relationships. When you interact with pets, your brain releases oxytocin, reduces cortisol production, and activates reward centers. The biological basis for human-animal bonds makes perfect sense from an evolutionary perspective. Humans have lived alongside animals for thousands of years, developing neural circuits that respond to caring for other living beings. When you pet a dog, feed a cat, or simply observe animals, your brain interprets these interactions as social bonding experiences. The unconditional acceptance that animals provide can be particularly healing for people who struggle with human relationships. I worked with a client who suffered from severe social anxiety after a traumatic workplace experience. Human interactions triggered panic attacks, but she found peace caring for rescue cats. The cats provided companionship without judgment or complex social dynamics. Over time, the confidence she gained from these relationships helped her gradually re-engage with human connections. The cats served as a bridge back to fuller social engagement. Caring for other living beings activates nurturing neural pathways that create deep satisfaction. This applies to pets, plants, and even wild animals you might feed or observe. The act of providing care triggers ancient brain circuits associated with parenting and community survival. Your brain releases serotonin and dopamine when you successfully nurture another living thing, creating feelings of purpose and accomplishment. Different personalities find happiness through different connection types, and this is crucial to understand. Introverts might find deep satisfaction in caring for plants or having one close companion animal, while extroverts might thrive on interactions with multiple pets and frequent social gatherings. Research shows that forcing yourself into connection patterns that don't match your temperament actually increases stress rather than promoting happiness. Some people discover their greatest joy in connecting with nature itself. They feel most alive when hiking in forests, swimming in oceans, or simply sitting in gardens. These connections activate different neural pathways than social relationships, but they're equally valid for promoting well-being. Nature connections tend to calm the nervous system and provide perspective on life's challenges. Intergenerational relationships contribute significantly to life satisfaction by providing wisdom exchange and continuity across time. When young people spend time with elders, both groups benefit neurologically. Older adults maintain cognitive function through teaching and sharing experiences, while younger people gain perspective and emotional support. These relationships reduce feelings of loneliness and isolation for both generations. Community involvement and belonging serve as crucial elements in individual happiness. Participating in community activities, volunteering, and engaging in shared interests creates what researchers call social identity. Your brain needs to feel that you belong to groups larger than yourself. This belonging activates reward centers and provides resilience during personal challenges. I've seen remarkable transformations in clients who found their community through shared interests. One man discovered profound happiness volunteering at an animal shelter, combining his love for animals with service to his community. Another client found her tribe through a community garden, connecting with both plants and neighbors simultaneously. These experiences provided multiple types of connection within single activities. Spiritual or transcendent connections represent another important category that affects well-being. Whether through meditation, prayer, or connecting with nature, these practices provide a sense of meaning and purpose that activates different brain networks than social connections. Spiritual practices often involve feeling connected to something larger than yourself, whether that's a religious tradition, the natural world, or universal principles. Research emphasizes building a diverse network of meaningful connections rather than putting all your social needs on one or two relationships. This approach creates resilience because if one connection is temporarily unavailable, others can provide support. It also ensures that different aspects of your personality and interests are nurtured through appropriate relationships. Practical strategies for building this diverse network start with identifying which types of connections you currently have and which might be missing. If you have strong human relationships but feel disconnected from nature, you might explore gardening or hiking. If you have good friendships but lack community involvement, you might seek volunteer opportunities or join clubs related to your interests. Research shows that even small steps toward diverse connections create measurable improvements in happiness. Joining local gardening groups or online communities allows you to share experiences and learn from others while building social bonds around shared interests. These connections can be particularly beneficial for older adults and individuals experiencing isolation. Community gardens provide excellent examples of multiple connection types within single spaces. You connect with plants through gardening, with neighbors through shared activities, and with nature through outdoor time. Adding comfortable seating, wind chimes, or bird feeders can transform these spaces into peaceful retreats that support both solitude and social connection. The key insight is that happiness doesn't require perfect relationships or ideal circumstances. It requires cultivating various types of meaningful connections that together create a support network addressing different psychological needs. Some connections provide intimacy, others provide purpose, and still others provide perspective or peace. When you understand this hierarchy and consciously build diverse connections, you create a foundation for sustained well-being that doesn't depend on any single relationship or circumstance remaining perfect. This comprehensive understanding of connection types provides the foundation for making practical changes that can transform your daily experience of happiness and fulfillment. Now let's bring all this research together into actionable insights you can use immediately. The science is clear. Genuine happiness comes from 3 evidence-based foundations. First, meaningful connections with others. The Harvard study of adult development proves that relationship quality at midlife predicts happiness decades later. Second, regular gratitude practice. Penn's neuroplasticity research shows this literally rewires your brain for better emotional regulation. Third, connection with nature. Clinical studies demonstrate that gardening and outdoor activities reduce cortisol and improve immune function. Most people chase achievements, possessions, and external validation thinking these will make them happy. But decades of research prove this approach fails consistently. True happiness isn't something you achieve through success or acquire through purchases. It's cultivated through specific practices that align with how your brain actually works.